Well, we're looking ahead to another hot day in East Texas, and state officials are carefully monitoring how this puts a strain on the Texas power grid.
Right now, ERCOT says the grid is operating under normal conditions and that there is enough energy supply to meet demand.
And that's thanks in no small part to renewable energy, which makes up about 37% of energy supplied. Wind and solar power are becoming increasingly important, in part because its generation peaks during the hottest parts of the day when the demand is highest.
Now, GMAT's Emma Kay is here with a breakdown of how ERCOT distributes that energy across the state. Emma, good morning.
Good morning. Now, this morning we're waking up to another record broken for electricity usage here in the Lone Star State. Demand is being driven by high temperatures lingering in those triple digits. ERCOT says the demand peaked at about 91,308 megawatts yesterday, marking the second time in a row this week that the record has been broken. That's after it happened the first time on Tuesday when demand reached about 87,000 megawatts, beating a record that had stood since August of 2023. Now, to put things in perspective, about 1 megawatt of electricity is enough to support about 250 homes during peak hours. ERCOT provides electricity for about 90% of the state. That means it supplies energy to more than 27 million people. The electricity must be stepped up to high voltages to be moved across the state, and it's then delivered along a portion of the more than 55,000 miles of transmission lines connecting the state to towers owned by local service providers who physically deliver that power to homes and businesses. ERCOT says it is prepared to handle the demand heading into the weekend, which is expected to hover in the mid 80,000 to lower 90,000 megawatt range. We might even see another usage record broken this week. Back to you.
All right, Emma, thank you.